Hello, this is Allie with the Perception Trainers, author of The Perception Diet, and today I want to talk to you about a different way to view failure, because I know that a lot of people really struggle with the idea of failure and really are like super afraid of failing, and this fear of failure, or this fear of being perceived as a failure, really holds a lot of people back from doing the things that they know they really want to do, and doing the things that really light them on fire. And so I wanted to talk today about failure, and I wanted to talk today about some practices you can use to start to frame failure in a different way so that it's not so debilitating, it's not so harmful. So the first thing that I want to talk about is just kind of my own experience with failure, and how I kind of came to this new way where I live in a way that I'm a lot more free of this fear. And that was like, I was just like everybody else for a long time, where I was just like so afraid of not being good enough, and so afraid of being perceived as not good enough, and so afraid of being embarrassed in a way that I was so constantly in this like hyper state of anxiety every time I did anything that was even slightly outside of my comfort zone. And then I stopped kind of doing things that were outside of my comfort zone, and I stopped doing things that I knew I couldn't be immediately good at because I didn't want to suffer the failure. And kind of through that experience of really like shutting myself down and making my life small so that I knew that I could succeed at everything that I was doing, I just realized that like life became really, really unsatisfying. And the further I went down that road, the further I made myself smaller and made my life smaller and stopped doing things that were scary, the more afraid I actually became, and the more anxious I actually became. It didn't actually make me feel safer. It actually made me feel more and more afraid. And like I say, I kind of had to like pare down and pare down and pare down and pare down. And it was just this constant cycle of just like not trying anything. And so I got to this place where I realized that like it wasn't this fear of failure and this fear of being perceived as a failure and doing things that made it so that I wouldn't be in a situation where I could fail wasn't actually making me happy, wasn't actually making me safe, wasn't actually protecting me from any of the negative emotions that I associated that would come from failure, and was actually creating more failure in my life than trying things and not doing well at them the first time ever could. So like that's the first thing that I want you to realize, is that a fear of failure, and that when you run away from things that are outside of your comfort zone, and you don't do things that you don't know that you'll immediately be successful at, or when you are so afraid of failure that you don't try things, you actually set yourself up to fail and to feel like you're failing more than anything else in your life. So this belief that if we just don't do things that we are not going to do good at is going to make me feel safe and not like a failure, is completely the opposite. You will actually feel more and more and more like a failure more often, and more afraid of failure, the more you run away from things that scare you and things that you don't know that you can do. Okay, so that's the first thing. Second thing, I realized that the only person's life I was making crappy by not trying things and being afraid of the perceived, of people perceiving me as a failure, was me. And it was like, I just kind of realized that it was like, you know, I was going to live my whole life and get to my deathbed and be like, phew, I'm so glad I didn't do anything that I may not have done well at first, and then people might have thought that I wasn't that great. Like, what? Like, that's basically what we're doing. When we're running away from failure, we're saying like, I just want to get to the end of my life having nobody thought about me that maybe I couldn't do something. And it's like, holy crap, how is that worth it? Is that worth it? To get to the end of your life and be like, phew, I never did anything to embarrass myself? Like, I just think that if we really think about this critically, and you really apply this to your life critically, and you really think, like at the end of your life, are you going to be happy that you never tried stuff, so therefore no one ever thought that you were a failure, or no one ever thought that you couldn't do something, or no one ever perceived you as being less than, and you protected yourself from that? Like, is it going to be worth it? Or are you going to be like, man, I just wish I had tried. I just wish that I had tried these things. I wish I had gone for it. I wish I had seen. And so, like, that's kind of part two, is that, you know, when we take on things we don't know that we're going to be able to do, when we take on things that we might fail, when we go through experiences that we're not sure how it's going to turn out, all it really does is add adventure to your life when you remove the attachment to this fear of what other people are going to think of you, or this fear of what you're going to think of yourself. And I think that what it really boils down to with that stuff is that you need to decide for yourself what is really valuable about you and what's really valuable about your life. It's like, you can live your whole life being afraid of how people are going to perceive you, and how people are going to perceive what you do, and how people might think that you look stupid. And you can live your whole life doing that, and that's just a choice. Or you can realize that at the end of the day, people are going to think about you for like 2 minutes, maybe. And then they're going to move on with their life, and they're going to be thinking about themselves. And so, really, I just think at the end of the day, we're not really actually that afraid of other people's disapproval of us. What we're really afraid of is our own disapproval of ourselves, is our own perception of our own failing. And so that leads me into point 3, is what if you can change your perception of what it means to fail? What if you could start to question how you perceive failure in a way that helps open up some freedom for you to try things and not feel so bad about it? So basically what I did was I started to say, like, okay, I can look at these things that I've tried and it didn't go exactly how I wanted it to go as failure. I can look at that as failure, and I can say I failed at ballet school because I didn't become a ballerina. I didn't become a ballet teacher. I didn't do any of these things. So I could look at that and be like, yeah, that was dumb. I shouldn't have done that. I failed. I can look at like many of the things that I've done in my life and be like, that was a fail. Or I can look at all of these things in my life and be like, okay, even if it totally just turned out to be absolutely nothing, at least now I know, hey, I don't want to be a ballet teacher. And if I hadn't gone through ballet school, I never would have known that that's not what I wanted. I always would have had that question in my mind. I always would have had that thought. I always would have been feeling held back and like I wasn't expressing myself properly if I hadn't given it a try. So just because it wasn't for me doesn't mean it was a fail that I tried. It means like, what, maybe I can think of it as a success. Like, hey, I tried and now I know it's not for me, right? Or maybe you fail at something and it leads you down this other path towards something different. And if you hadn't given it a try in the first place, you never would have gotten to the next thing that led you on the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. So same kind of thing. Like, you know, I worked at lots of yoga studios for a long time, and I really thought I was supposed to be a yoga teacher, and I tried really hard to be a yoga teacher, and I just kept running up against these roadblocks of just like never being able to get a job as a yoga teacher, never being able to like really break into the industry. And for a while there, I really looked at that as failure, and I was like, man, I suck. Like, maybe I'm just like a really crappy yoga teacher, like what's wrong with me? But then now I look back on it and I'm like, holy smokes, I am so glad that I didn't get into that, because I would so rather be doing what I'm doing now. I'm so much happier doing the writing and the talking and the videos and all the other things that I do, and I'm so glad I didn't get into yoga teaching, because if I had, I wouldn't have been developing the skills that have led me to be able to do what I do now, which is so much more fulfilling for me. So sure, I can look at my stint in the yoga world as a failure, or I can look at it as like, yeah, I was totally served through that. It helped me to get onto the path that I am now on, that I love, and I would never go back and change that. So I want you to just think that at the end of the day, how you perceive failure is an option, okay? It's not inborn. It's not dead set. However you feel and however you perceive failure in your life right now, if it makes you feel like crap, you don't have to keep believing that. And you don't have to keep perceiving it that way. You can change your perception of failure in a way that helps it feel better for you. And like I say, the way to do this, I would say, is number one, start again to believe that you have value, and to believe that your life has value, and to believe that instead of life being pass or fail, it's experience. So that's basically, like, that's the main thing that I did for myself, is I started to just question this belief of pass or fail. I started to just say, okay, clearly I believe that there's pass and fail, and that if something doesn't go exactly how I think it's supposed to go, it's a fail. And then when I started to shift into, what if life is experience? What if everything that I'm going through is just experience, and there is no pass and there is no fail, there is no right and there is no wrong, it's just experience and it's just learning, all of a sudden, everything that I go through has a gift for me. Everything that I go through has a blessing for me. Everything that I go through leads me to my next step. And nothing's debilitating and nothing is super painful because I don't attach the label of fail to it anymore, right? Now I perceive it as, okay, that taught me something. Okay, I learned something. Or, okay, like maybe this thing isn't going how I wanted it to go. Maybe there's something even better for me on the other side. Maybe it's not going to go how I want it to go, but that's just because I couldn't think of how amazing it could be if it went this totally other way. And you start to release the attachment to it going exactly how you want it to go, because everything else outside of that is fail, and everything outside of that is wrong. And you start to just say, okay, so what happens to me in my life is good for me. What happens to me in my life is experience, and through that experience I'm going to learn more about myself and more about life, and I'm going to be a richer person for it. And so therefore nothing can really be perceived as a fail if I experienced it, because I learned something. And so even if it totally didn't go how I wanted to go, even if it crashed and burned, now I know, right? And I can move on. And things just become a lot less painful, and things become a lot less scary, and it opens you up to be able to try the things that you need to try to get to the place you want to get. And I think the last thing I want to say is that, you know, in living your purpose, in becoming the person that you want to be, you're going to have to try and fail at a lot of things. And I think that this is like an important thing to say, is that nobody's road was like, hey, I want to be an author, and so they just sat down at their computer, wrote a book, and then sold millions of copies, and that's just the story, right? They went through like struggle writing the book, and like erasing chapters and losing chapters, and thousands of publishing companies rejecting them, and then it finally gets published, and then no one buys it, and then you have to build your thing, and blah, blah, blah. And all of that is what they needed in order to become a serious professional author that could stand the test of time. All of the things that they went through, all of the fails, were actually just like building their muscles, building their strength, so that when they got to where they wanted to be, they could sustain it, they could maintain it, they could do it on a high level, right? So I want you to think of it like that. All the things that scare you, and all the things you're afraid to do, and all the things that you failed at, all of those things are building your muscles for you to be the person that you want to be. It's the universe saying, okay, we are totally on board for you becoming the person you want to be. We're totally on board for you becoming the thing you want to become. Here's your training regime, so that when you get there, you can be there, right? It's like saying, okay, I want to be a marathon runner, and then saying like, oh, I went out to run my first marathon and I couldn't do it. It's like, no, you're going to have to take training steps. You're going to do training runs, you're going to do pace runs, you're going to do long runs, you're going to do speed runs, you're going to do time trials, you're going to do all these different training things, and you're going to fail at some of them, and then you're going to try again and do better, and you're going to break your body down and build it up, and break your body down and build it up, until you get to the place where you can run marathons well, and you can do it consistently, and maintain health, and just continue to improve. And it's because you did all that training, and because you did all that failing, and because you did all that work, that made it so that you could do that. Right? So if you don't try, if you don't do things that you're going to fail at, if you don't have these experiences where you fall down and get back up and fall down and get back up, you won't have the strength and the stamina and the muscles, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, to do what you need to do what you want to do. Okay? So think of it like that. Everything that's in your path is building your muscles so that you can be the person you want to be. And so nothing's a fail. Everything is just a training ground for you, so that you can be the person you want to be. So don't look at it as fail. Look at it as an experience. Look at it as breaking down those muscle fibers so they can be built back stronger. That's exactly what you're doing. Every single time you try something and fail, every single time you try something and it doesn't work, you learn. You become better. You become stronger. And it's not a fail. And if people want to perceive it as a fail, just know that that's their own limiting belief in their own life, but you don't have to hold on to that. Just because someone else thinks it's a fail, you don't. Right? Just because someone else is like, oh, you failed at that, you can be like, or I learned. You don't have to own anyone else's perception that doesn't make you feel good. So that's that. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave them down below. I love hearing from you. Instagram, you can find me Urban Fruit Bat. Facebook, you can find me Perception Trainers. I love your messages. I love your comments. I love your questions. I love hearing from you. I want this to be a dialogue, right? My videos, I don't want it to be just me talking to you. I want you to talk to me, okay? So I love hearing from you. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.